Well, the story was much worse than that.
Oh, much worse.
The single biggest mistake that I made at any point in my business journey tried to shut me down on Christmas Eve.
Oh my God.
My gut instinct was there for a reason. Ended up going viral on the internet. 77 countries around the world now. We couldn't roll out in hospitals quick enough. Suddenly everybody knew what I'd been talking about in the pandemic. Many investors came knocking. We actually did more in pre-orders through our own website in the next month than we'd done on Kickstarter. For me, there was never any doubt that there wasn't a place for it in the world. My body just crashed and gave out. You can work your ass off and not get the results you deserve in business. I was so ill. The doctors thought I had MS. I wanted to come up with a way for technology to let us just sit in the same room as someone. Just burst into tears. If I walk out of this hospital and get hit by a bus, I've made my contribution.
Welcome to today's episode. I'm so truly happy that you've tuned in. Why? Because it means I get to interview some incredible guests and use my platform as both an educational and inspirational source to you there listening in, whether you're a budding or early stage founder. I love what I do, and it's thanks to you that I get to keep doing this. So thank you so much. I really hope you enjoy the show. If it's your first time here, welcome, welcome. Please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes. And if you're tuning back in, then welcome back. It's so good to have you here. So I mentioned I get to interview some incredible guests on this show here, and wowzers, today's is no exception. I'm joined by fellow One Day mentor Joanna Montgomery, the founder of Little Riot and the creative mind behind the internet phenomenon Pillow Talk, a wristband that picks up your heartbeat and sends it in real time to your loved one. Now used in over 70 countries around the world, Joanna has also spoken at TEDx and WIRED Conference, and fun fact, she's also England's strongest woman. Joanna, welcome to Strategy and Tragedy.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so we're definitely going to talk about your fun facts. But first of all, you have to tell this story. So it's back in 2018, you handed your product over to someone, they used it for a few seconds, and they burst into tears. What happened?
That's an interesting place to start in the journey, I guess. Yeah, for me, that was the first time I really understood the impact of what I'd built. So just to put a little bit of context around it, the product started out as my university project many years ago and ended up going viral on the internet. So I started my business straight out of university with very little idea what I was doing. I now realise in hindsight. And the journey from it being an idea to sort of building it and launching it and ultimately shipping a consumer electronic product was very long and complicated. And I think at that point you're talking about in a hospital was still maybe round about when we just first started to ship the product. So it was still super early. It was still the first version of the product. And yeah, we'd had a children's hospital in the Netherlands reach out to us, and they'd said they had read about it in the newspaper and they thought it could be a really interesting replacement for skin-to-skin contact between babies and children, and could I come in for a meeting to show them the product. And I said, sure, we're still, we've only just launched the first version, but we'll come along. So I went to see them, and I was actually being shown round the hospital by the nurse that was leading the research project. And we passed through this ward, and there was a couple in there with their child who was maybe, I think about 2 years old, who just had heart surgery, and they were in intensive care. And the nurse was showing me around, and the couple said something to the nurse in Dutch, and she said, oh, they're asking what it is and what you've got in your hands and what does it do. And she explained it to them, and they said, oh, can we try it? And I was like, oh, and anyone that thinks giving a live demo is stressful has never had to put the first version of their product onto a very sick child. So I was expecting the nurse to say, oh no, it's not possible. And she turned to me and said, can we wipe it? Is it okay if we wipe it down with alcohol? And I said, yes. And so she wiped it down with alcohol, and we put the wristband on the child that had just had surgery. So she was too sick to be taken out of bed. And we gave the speaker to the parents, and the mum put it against her ear and just burst into tears and said, oh my God, we've been so worried. Like, we've been through so much stress. It's really good to hear how alive they are. And I just, in that moment, I thought, if I walk out of this hospital and get hit by a bus, I've made my contribution to there.
Oh, Joanna, well, I'm very glad that you didn't get hit by a bus walking out of that hospital. That really does tug on the heartstrings. What a powerful story. And I think we always talk about solving a pain point in entrepreneurship and adding value and all these things. And I think your story is such a great one to share because it's a fantastic example of using technology, innovative thinking for something, as you describe, as actually, you know, more of the human, like solving a really human pain point there. So where did the idea come from?
So I studied interaction design, which was basically computer science with some design elements. I think the idea of the course at the time was they had computing students that could make things work, but didn't necessarily understand the human part of a design process.
Right.
And then they had the design school churning out designers who could do the person bit and come up with these lovely ideas and these lovely concepts, but didn't have the technical ability to make them work. So we were meant to be these magical hybrid creatures that sat in the middle that could sort of cover that full end-to-end spectrum of the design process. And when I started the course, the first iPhone had just come out, or had only been out a year or two.
Wow.
And everyone was like obsessed with the iPhone. Everyone loved like all this, like the gestures of how it worked. And it was just a really exciting time to be working at that intersection of how we as humans interact with technology. And by the time I was maybe 2 years into the course, I remember looking around the room and just everything had become about the smartphone. Like everybody was just obsessed with the screen. It was obsessed with that being the input and the output of everything.
Yeah, totally.
And I thought, you know, this is cool, but what's the world going to look like in sort of 5-10 years time when we're all walking around with like literal supercomputers in our pockets? And yeah, at the time everybody thought I was being a bit sort of negative about that possible trajectory. And I just had a real interest in how we could use technology in a way that was more aligned with how we interact with each other normally as humans.
Yeah.
And I realized that technology we either have to schedule in time to use technology like a Skype call or a FaceTime call, or we have to be constantly interrupted by notifications or incoming calls. And I thought the most natural way of being with somebody is you come home at night, you sit in the same room as them, maybe one person reads a book, one person watches television, but you spend that time together. And I felt like I wanted to come up with a way for technology to let us just sit in the same room as someone.
Yeah, that's so lovely. And so we can't talk about the pandemic in this conversation around connecting humans, technology. What did 2020 do for your business?
The pandemic was a little bit bittersweet for us because for years I had been sort of preaching that video calls weren't good enough and they weren't intimate enough, and it didn't foster human connection in the same
exactly.
way. And obviously the people that were in those difficult situations, so couples in long distance relationships, parents that were away from their children at bedtime at night, and people with relatives in hospitals, they sort of understood that. But a lot of people didn't. And investors would say to me, like, video calls are enough, that's fine, we don't need any more than that. And then the pandemic rolled around and suddenly everybody knew what I'd been talking about all that time. So it was a bit of a strange one for us because it really validated our product way beyond what we ever would have managed otherwise. And we were lucky enough to be in a position as a business where we could help so many people in bad situations. So we saw a huge increase of not only our consumer sales, but also inquiries from hospitals. We had hospitals just we couldn't roll out in hospitals quick enough, mainly because we couldn't get there and couldn't install that. So we had hospitals just bulk buying the consumer product, and we had people buying it to send or to take to relatives they had in hospital. And we received some really lovely but heartbreaking emails about how people had used it through COVID, people's children going in for chemo on their own, or elderly people in hospitals.
So for any of the podcast listeners who are listening in and can't see Joanna at the moment, if you're not watching on YouTube or anything, your body language, your facial expressions, I can see how much pain there is kind of reliving that. Can I just clarify, it sounds as though COVID was good for the business in a pure business sense in terms of validating the product, getting that demand, connecting humans when we couldn't physically be together. So is the the bitter side to the sweet just the obvious with what a painful time COVID was, or was there another angle that I'm missing there from the business?
So I mean, it was great for business.
Yeah.
In that black and white sense. It was kind of bittersweet in that it literally took a global pandemic for so many people to appreciate what we were building. And I think as well, just from a personal perspective, there's a bit of maybe not guilt, but it's just a bit icky to have like made so much money from such a horrible thing where so many people
I can tell, and this is where I don't want to pry, but at the same time I want to clarify, because again, I'm just picking up on so much of this pain from you of like,
it's an interesting point.
Just your face, your reactions, everything bringing this up is like, oh no, it's horrible. Like,
just feels a bit ick. Like it's just like I'm glad, like the thing that I guess I do feel good about is that I know we help so many people, because I've got an inbox full of emails of people that are so grateful for the fact that it existed and that, because if that didn't exist, those horrible situations would arguably have been even worse.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
Like overall, I feel like we did a really good thing.
You did. And COVID wasn't your fault.
No.
I feel like I need to tell you that. But I get it. I get what you're saying about the ick. You mentioned investors very briefly before there as well. So with this surge in product demand, product validation, did investors start changing their mind then? Was it easier for you to get funding at that point, or what happened there on the fundraising side?
So we've been profitable since about 2015. So right from, so we have raised 2 VC rounds in the past. And then once we shipped our product for pre-order, from that point on, whilst our cash flow, we had the typical cash flow challenges you do with any sort of physical product business that's managing inventory. But from there on, we didn't fundraise again for various reasons. But yes, when in the pandemic, many investors came knocking.
Right.
It's funny how that happens.
It's so funny. I know, isn't it? I just hear so often, you can imagine on this show as well, you know, the one variable is the amazing guest that sat opposite me, right? And it just makes it easier for me to treat this like a research project, right? And it's easier to kind of look at the themes, what are the patterns, and the investor topic, obviously that always comes up. It is amazing how, you know, they are supposed to be the risk takers. It's called venture capital. They are supposed to see what's not there, especially at the pre-seed, see, you know, those very early stages. It's like, we don't have validation, we don't have the data, we don't have the service, because it is just so early. Like you've got to take a bet. So it's a lot of contradiction in that space, because there's a lot of that FOMO that seems to drive them. When they see others, they do sort of, it seems like they all sort of jump on the same kind of bandwagon to mitigate that risk. So
I was amazed at, you know, for having been on the fundraising circuit for so long and having like struggled to raise money in the past, or at least found it quite challenging. To that then the way suddenly when things are going well and like
everyone switches,
you're getting that hockey stick growth. Then suddenly they're all just booking calls to catch up.
It's funny, isn't it?
Sorry, I'm too busy.
I'm too busy shipping out all
let
these
me know
orders.
If it could be helpful.
Exactly. Like now you want to know. We have to touch on you being a woman as well in the tech industry. Obviously, you are still part of a teeny tiny minority. I just did a recording actually on this topic, which I feel incredibly passionate about. Did you come across any hurdles, anything that made things harder for you as a woman? Or I guess actually a better question is like, what do you think kind of helped you to secure the cash from the venture capitalists?
It's this is always a really interesting topic to me, because so I studied computer science, which is also very male oriented, and there was only 2 other girls in my year at university, and when I was at university, it just wasn't a thing. Like I know that sounds stupid, but we just didn't really notice, and it just didn't really, I don't know if it's like I'm just a bit of a tomboy and like most of my friends are guys, and maybe I just didn't really, but I don't think I was lucky in that I got on quite well with the other 2, so we were all friends, but it just wasn't really a thing. And And then I felt like I graduated and I came out into the world and I started a business, and suddenly everybody was like, how does it feel to be a woman? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. I've never thought about this.
Yeah.
But then I guess having been made aware of that, it showed up. Every female entrepreneur's got all the stories of like the awful things men have said to them or jokes that have been cracked. I was thinking about one earlier, actually. I once turned up I used to have this really cool bright pink blazer, and I turned up at a meeting, and I came in, and this guy looked up and went, oh, look, it's Business Barbie. And just like stuff like that, I think sometimes being a woman, I found anyway, I don't know if it's just the industry or just bad luck in the kinds of men I encountered, but there's a sort of some belief that you're maybe not quite as capable, or you shouldn't be taken quite as seriously. So I came up against all those things. I think particularly in relation to fundraising, the thing that I did have going for me was because my product's a funny one, right? Like arguably it's quite like fluffy, it's quite cute. Some people are like, oh, that's cool, but is it a novelty thing, and the fact that it had gained so much traction so quickly on the internet, and that I had this huge wait list, and that I had people coming to the site signing up, and I had this big community of people that wanted to be part of the product development journey, I think really worked in my favor there, because it wasn't just me saying, I've got this great idea, please believe in it. It was me saying, I've got this great idea, and it accidentally went nuts on the internet, and now all these people are queuing up to buy it.
Yeah, you've got that proof point to back it up.
Yeah.
And you're totally right. This is why I kind of changed my mind halfway through asking that question, because it is so nuanced. We could easily spend just the whole bloody like podcast episode on this point, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but it's like, on the one hand, I do want to address the fact that you are a female entrepreneur, you're a woman in tech, you are in the minority, but at the same time, I don't want to keep compounding that same unhelpful narrative, which is where you said yourself, every female entrepreneur has got those stories, especially with the investors, like the unconscious bias, the jokes, how they're just not treated as seriously. You feel like you have to run like twice as fast to get half as far. And it's kind of like, I feel like we all know that. And so this is where it's like, okay, what's actually the positives? What actually helped you? Let's turn this into a more productive conversation. So I think that last point, just to underscore there, which was you had that validation, you had that proof point that could back you up and give you more of that kudos and credibility when you go into the rooms. Is there anything else you want to add on that before I move on to the next question? Or
I think as well, the other thing that's worth mentioning is that for every man that makes a joke, there is a man who is your ally. And I think everywhere I've been, I've always eventually found someone who's like, wow, okay, you're really badass. Like the fact you've managed to do this in this industry, or like, oh, you like coded the first version of your software, or you like made your own prototypes. Oh, okay, maybe I should actually take you maybe even more seriously than I might take a man in this position. And yeah, I think that's worth bearing in mind as well. It's like they're not all out to get us. And being in a minority can also be a good thing, as long as you can try and find your way to the right people who support that.
Joanna, I love so much that you said that. Honestly, you're speaking right to my heart. I just did a thing as well on male allyship. I've written a whole post on that. So I agree. I would categorically not be here today if it weren't for the men who've helped me along the way as well. So definitely do not want this to feel like man bashing. I remember so clearly going to this event. It rubbed me up the wrong way so much, which is why I still remember this woman in the audience. Again, like happened to be a minority, but fine. This woman in the audience sat at the back. She raised her hand. She got up for the Q&A at the end, and she was very much on like this sob story and playing the world's smallest violin and like, I'm a woman, I'm a murderer. And it was just kind of like, you could so easily retell that exact same story in a different way that works to your favor. Like to your point, which is like, I am the only woman in this room, so like, listen to me. You better like I'm the only one here. Like,
yeah, like it's just victim mindset, right? It's
right,
like
the victimizing.
Exactly. If a woman if you decide you're at a disadvantage, you're at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
And you've to some degree also put yourself at a disadvantage.
Exactly.
Or you can decide that.
Preaching to the choir. I love it. I like we're completely on the same page with that. All right. So back to Little Riot, which is the parent company of Pillow Talk, which is the product. So we mentioned about product validation, those data points, that backed you up to get that investment. I read that you also talked about sort of being 10 years ahead of the curve, so to speak. And this is another pattern I found with really disruptive, innovative tech products, is there is such a thing as being too ahead of the curve. What I'm curious about, I guess, before you got that huge uplift during COVID, what were your validation points that helped you distinguish between there is something here, we are just ahead of the curve, versus actually, are we kidding ourselves? Is there any product market fit here? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, good question.
Like early indicators to know that you're not just kidding yourself.
I think, again, I feel like a lot of my, obviously not all my success is down to luck, but I've been very lucky in a lot of ways. And one of the things that I got so lucky with was the way it went viral on the internet, and I gained that huge following of people that really loved the product. So for me, there was never any question that I hadn't found product market fit and that there wasn't demand for it. And even when things were really difficult and really hard, and I was thinking maybe I can't do this, because the biggest challenges we actually had in terms of being ahead of the curve were not only the sort of maybe the mass adoption wasn't ready, but the tech wasn't there for what we were trying to build. Bluetooth Low Energy didn't exist commercially. Batteries were not small at all. I was trying to build a wristband 3 years before the first Fitbit came out. So investors were saying to me, people never wear technology on their wrists. So I had lots of investors and lots of people telling me it wasn't going to work. And then still a huge proportion of people I explained the concept to were like, that's weird. But the thing that sort of kept me going all the way through that, and it was almost like I would sit in the office late at night, and it was almost like every time I thought, oh, maybe this is too hard and I can't do it, or I'm not going to find the money to make these or whatever, I'd get an email come in from a customer saying, can I order this yet? Can I buy this yet? I've been with my partner, we're 3,227.2 miles apart and we can't wait for it. And I'd be like, okay, fine. So that was hands down the having that constant customer validation. Just for me, there was never any doubt that there wasn't a place for it in the world.
Yeah. Oh my God, I love that so much. And it's so heartwarming. And even on that more personal, internal level, right? You need that just to kind of stay motivated. But then on that more black and white kind of business side, it's well, we do need these proof points, because as you say, it's investors are saying people aren't going to wear technology on their wrists. Again, back to these pioneering venture capitalists.
So funny now.
No one's going to do that. Okay, all sat here with wearables on our wrists. And as you say, you try and explain it to people as well. I'm not quite getting it, but then you get those other proof points. So I love that so much. One other quick thing I need to ask you as well I'm jumping around a little bit, but just on the investor thing as well, which was, I heard that you had an investor pull out right at the last minute just before Christmas. What was that about? Quick one. This is future Steph coming to you from beyond. If you're enjoying this episode, then you can probably guess what I want you to do. Please do me one tiny favor that costs you nothing and takes a second of your time. Hit that subscribe button. It really helps to support this show, and I'm really grateful for you listening. Let's get back into it. You had an investor pull out right at the last minute just before Christmas. What was that about?
Oh no, the story was much worse than that.
Oh, much worse.
Great.
Worse
than that. It's kind of a long story. So it actually all boils down to the single biggest mistake that I made at any point in my business journey along the way, which was when I raised my first round of investment. I think I had about 3 investors interested. We were sort of in negotiations, and then one of them produced a term sheet, and they were sort of my least preferable option, but they were the ones that could move the quickest.
How come they were your least preferable at this stage?
Reputation. I think I just was a little bit less convinced about them than the other two, but the other two were sort of dragging their heels a bit, or kept moving the goalposts, and I was like, I don't know if I should just do this. And I had a part-time financial director at the time, and he sat down and said, well, here's the term sheet, the money's there, they can complete within 2 weeks, and you can carry on building. And, maybe you should write a list of pros and cons for taking the money versus not taking the money. And I just didn't feel good about it. And that's like the only thing I can tell you about that. It just didn't feel right. And this guy sat here and said, you know, you just don't feel good about it because it's new to you. And when I wrote this list, sure enough, the only con against taking the money was it didn't feel right. And he said, Jo, you can't run a business on gut instinct. And I thought, you're right. Like, you know, this guy, I don't know, this was like not to sound like a man bashing again, but just a very average middle-aged white man in a suit. And I was like, you know what, you're right. And so he convinced me that I was inexperienced and young. And that was why I didn't think I should do that. And he said, once you've cashed the check and you're in the pub, you'll feel a lot better. So signed the deal, cashed the check, went to the pub, didn't feel any better. And obviously my gut instinct was there for a reason, because things with those investors just got worse and worse. They were just extremely difficult to work with. It felt like everything was a game to them. Whenever I needed their help, they'd say, okay, we'll approve that or sign that off if you do this. And I was like, are we not all working towards the same thing here? So it was just relentless. And after maybe about a year and a half, the details of it are complicated, but basically they sort of set me up in a way where I then technically defaulted on the arrangement. So they told me, oh, don't do that just now. We've got an internal meeting and we'll come back to you. So I waited for them to come back to me, and then they stopped replying to my emails. And so because I hadn't done the thing they told me not to do, I technically defaulted on the investment agreement. So they'd obviously set that up deliberately. So then they served me notice on Christmas Eve, asking for the full amount of investment back plus interest.
Oh my God.
Which obviously technically made me insolvent as a business.
Fuck.
I had to tell all my staff on Boxing Day that they didn't have jobs to come back to in January.
Oh my God.
And I literally never saw them or spoke to them again. They wouldn't take a meeting. They wouldn't answer a phone call. They just sent a courier to deliver the letter. And
wow.
Yeah, tried to shut me down on Christmas Eve.
Oh my God, Joanna, that is horrible. That's taken the wind out of me.
It was awful. It was hands down the worst part of my business journey so far.
And which stage was this at exactly? This was like very early days,
this was
right?
only 3 years in, maybe.
Jesus. Yeah. So I'm guessing, are you kind of like in your 20s at this point? I mean, age is just a number, but like you're a few years in. How long have you graduated at this point?
Yeah, I was maybe 23, 24 at that point.
Wow.
So yeah, still pretty young.
That is crazy. What dirty bastards. So I'm still processing this horrible story, but like having to make your staff redundant, having to let people go. I've had so many other guests on this show as well say like that's also been like one of the most painful things I've ever had to experience. I can't imagine what it's like for a 23, 24-year-old that the first business just...
I mean, I dread to think how that... I can't even really remember. Like, it's all just a blur when I look back now. Because I'd never had a job.
Yeah, exactly.
I've still never had a job. So I had no...
Like, exposure.
I'd had no... Like, let alone firing anyone. I probably wasn't even a very good boss for a very long time because I had no benchmark. I had no concept of what was good and what wasn't good, or what I wanted, or how it was meant to be done. So I mean, fortunately they seem to take it reasonably well, and they seem to understand, and you know, those investors had enough of a reputation that nobody seemed, I mean, everyone was shocked, but no one seemed that shocked.
So. Jesus. Well, I am shocked. I'm like I just need a breather. I don't understand how, like, just why someone would want to do that. Like, again, you're so, especially from a VC and investor perspective, you're supposed to be, your whole business, the whole way you generate your money is through the returns from the people you're investing. Why play these like silly bugger games?
It's so weird. I still to this day have no idea, you know, like what caused it, what presumably something made them just give up all hope or all confidence in it, but I just think it was so cowardly to not even be able to call a meeting to discuss it, and instead you have to use such heavy-handed techniques to try and get something done. But
exactly,
it's just what they were like.
So wild. And then how did your finance director react? Were you still with him?
I then found out that he'd been working part-time for them.
Oh,
so
the plot thickens.
The plot, yes.
Oh.
So there was probably a huge conflict of interest there that he did not disclose.
Oh, shit.
So it's just all...
Oh, Jesus.
It's all a big mess.
Well, big lessons learned. And
well, the lesson in it all is...
gut instinct.
Trust your gut instinct and have really good lawyers.
Yeah.
Because that's how I got out of that situation, was my lawyers were much better than theirs.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Do you want to shout out, or what did you look for to find a good lawyer, if anyone wants to take a note there?
So again, I guess that was actually also based on gut instinct. So my lawyer, when I needed a lawyer, I had met a guy who worked for a law firm at some random event who'd come to chat to me afterwards and said he was in a long distance relationship and he loved the product, and we just had a really nice chat, and he'd given me his card and said, if you ever need anything, let me know. And so I called him.
Nice.
I was like, hey,
amazing.
And he found the right person in his firm, and they wiped the floor with my investors.
They wiped the floor. I love that. Well, I'm very happy that there's kind of, a bit of a happy ending to that crazy story. And I love how the same thing that, that you ignored that got you into that mess, i.e. your gut instincts, was the same thing that helped you find that great lawyer that helped get you out of it afterwards as well. I think the fact that they're also a product user, a fan of the brand, there was that genuine connection as well, definitely helps. Joanna, how crazy, how wild. Oh my goodness. All right, so listeners, gut instinct, trust your gut, don't let other people kind of push you around, and good lawyers, basically, to underscore that one. So at the very least, I guess, like, getting this out the way, like, early on in the process, like, at least that kind of, like, taught you an unforgettable lesson. As you said, this was only a few years in. I'm guessing onwards and upwards from there, beyond that point. We go into COVID, lots of product validation, investment. What happens next in your journey?
I mean, onwards and upwards would...
It's always a squiggly line, isn't it?
More a big tangled ball, I guess. Once I got rid of those investors, that was then when I moved to London. So I was in the north of England before then. And so moved to London, new investors, joined an accelerator program.
Which one?
WIRA,
okay.
Yeah. So that was really interesting for me as somebody who had started a business outside of London to really end up in that London ecosystem. Like, I'd visited a lot before and I knew some people, but the level of ambition here and what's possible is just so much greater than possibly other regions outside of London. So for me, that was really having spent so long trying to build a business, and especially hardware, at times, like, kind of before anybody was really building hardware, and it was too difficult and everyone said it was too much money, and I was almost, maybe not, I was still going to find a way to do it, but I was starting to think that, raising big sums of money or whatever was not possible, or that maybe what I was trying to do was going to be too hard. And then, you come to London and you sit in an office with people that have just raised their £2 million pre-seed round or whatever, and that kind of expands your horizons a bit. So
love that.
That was really great for me as a founder, and just really, helped us sort of raise our aspirations.
That's great. I mean, you must have also been very much like once bitten, twice shy after that horrendous experience with the early investors, right?
So Telefonica were actually really great because they helped me negotiate out of that situation with my previous lawyers.
Okay.
So when they made me the investment offer, they knew that we needed to get rid of the other guys or like neutralize them. So they actually, I mean, they're such a big global firm, and like I sat in on some of the calls between them and my other investors, and they just, I'd never been more pleased to have
run circles
to
around
have
them.
those people on my side.
That's amazing.
Because they squished them down into such a small irrelevant shareholding that
that's what you needed.
And it was for me as well, it was really nice to get all that equity back.
Fantastic. That's another good outcome then. Fantastic.
So, because Telefonica's outcome, or their approach was, we want to invest in businesses where the founders are suitably motivated and that, they have what they feel they need to drive them forward. And if you go on and raise more money and, you'll be diluted down to a point where you might not feel like it's worth it for you. So they very much took the approach of, let's get this to a position where you as a founder still feel good about it.
Yeah, nice. Very sensible.
Yeah, very sensible.
Right.
And nice to have
them on
that
your side.
And so we were there for about a year, and then it was just at the end, just before our demo day in the accelerator, that we launched the product for pre-order. So that was really great for us because that let us not only bring in money, but it helped us test some some assumptions we had about the product. So it helped us test things like how we were going to ship it, how we were going to, because we assumed people would want to buy it, like I'd buy one and you'd buy one and they'd be sent to us respectively. But what we discovered through that was that just by launching for pre-order, that people actually wanted to buy it together and then gift one half. So it was a really interesting way for us to test some of those ideas we had. But the other great thing it did was it fronted that money for us up front to manufacture it. So we knew exactly how many we needed to make, because that's the other thing. Whenever you make a physical product, how many do we start with?
Yeah.
How many do we manufacture?
Yeah.
And trying to find that balance can be tricky. So having done a pre-order batch, we knew how many to make, and we knew roughly how many we were selling a month. So that helped dictate all those financial models and the inventory management flow. And then, from there on, it was sort of, from there on, it was onwards.
Yeah,
a little bit.
With Telefonica in your back. And just to connect the dots for any listeners, so WIRED is the accelerator from Telefonica.
Telefonica's accelerator.
Exactly. And with the pre-order campaign, what worked for you in terms of the sales and marketing to generate the buzz for the pre-orders? Do you remember?
So again, kind of lucky in that we already had this huge community. We already had this huge mailing list. We ran a Kickstarter campaign because at the time Kickstarter was quite cool. I'm not sure that was worth doing because I don't know. There's a few weeks after it ended. So we did this for a month. We ran the campaign, and that's all we did all the time, was almost 24/7 was like promote this, go to events, tell people about it, try and get press coverage, try and drive traffic to the site. And then a while after, somebody showed me a South Park episode where they decide to run a Kickstarter campaign, and they do it, and then Cartman or someone's like, oh, wait a minute, so you're telling me that we put this on their site and then we do all the marketing, we do all the activity, we work our butts off to try and drive traffic to it, and then they take a cut? And he's like, no thanks. And I remember watching it and thinking,
oh my God.
I've been played. So we actually, we went flat out on the Kickstarter, and then when that ended and we'd all flopped in a heap on the office floor, we just switched to just a pre-order button on our own website, and we actually did more in pre-orders through our own website in the next month than we'd done on Kickstarter when we were trying really hard.
Wow,
so,
another interesting lessons learned there. I love that. So to recap, you already sort of built up a mailing list. You had that community from before, because it had been a few years anyway, in the making. And then there was that good old fashioned hustle. At this point, driving traffic to the Kickstarter, but then switching over to your own website actually worked just fine and dandy, apparently. Okay, amazing. Lots of lovely lessons learned. Where is Pillow Talk, Little Riot? Where are we at today? What's going on at the moment? What's next on the cards for you?
So we are consumer products in, I think it's about 77 countries around the world now, which is quite exciting. And we do a lot more work in children's hospitals now.
By the way, can I just say, it's very easy to just drop in a number, but 77 countries, let's just take a moment there, because listeners, how many countries can you even name? I don't think I can name 77 countries. So pat on the back to you for that. That's amazing. Just not, brush past that one. That's awesome. Genuinely. So sorry, I cut you off, but you're in 77 countries.
Yeah. And then I guess our bigger focus now is kind of the hospital space, in that and again, that's something that happened kind of organically. It was always sort of on the roadmap for someday. But we thought, we'd have to raise much more money and be much bigger before we could do that. And then, we just got super lucky again with that first hospital in the Netherlands.
Do you know how they found you?
They read about it in a Dutch newspaper.
In a Dutch newspaper?
Yeah, so that's how they found us. And they ran this.
How did you get in a Dutch newspaper?
Oh, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't know.
Do you know what? I just had to say on that point as well, like as much as you were saying about being lucky earlier, and of course your success is down to much more than just luck. But as much as we try to strategize and plan, there are just these things that are out of our control that do just happen for good and bad, right? Like
it can
getting
make
in a Dutch,
right? Like that. And then how many other people had really great businesses, and then a pandemic and what are the odds? Like no one saw that coming.
Yeah.
And, it just takes one market change, one global event.
Yeah. A new competitor, a global pandemic. Like it's how we adapt to those situations, isn't it? So you had, so is it more hospitals now? Sorry, that's more the focus.
So sort of they ran a pilot, and then because it was a research project, they published those findings, and that opened a bit of a can of worms for us in a good way. We were then got a lot of interest off the back of that, and so it was kind of, we ended up in that space a little bit sooner than we thought.
That's great. And something there as well with like, you're not always ready for these things, right? Like you've got to just dive in with 2 feet.
Yeah, I mean, I love that quote about entrepreneurship, about how being an entrepreneur is jumping out of a plane with everything you need to build a parachute. And I think that's very, very accurate, and that's certainly how my journey has felt. And I think with any business, whether you're growing, scaling, or pivoting, or expanding into a different industry or sector, as we were, you just you think you've built a parachute, and then someone cuts it off you, and you're back in the plane, and you've got to do it again.
Right, and then a gust of wind comes along, and then a shark jumps out the ocean. And
then oh no, you're on fire.
I feel like we can keep going with this. I feel like this is all sounding much too real for our listeners, I'm sure.
I love how we're laughing, because otherwise we'd cry.
Laughing to not cry. Like, I totally get it. But if it is any reassurance, it's like we all get it. We are in the same. Like jumping out of the same plane, well, different planes, but we've all got the parachutes that we're trying to build along the way.
We're trying not to hit each other on the way down as well, aren't we?
Watch out for the tsunami coming from the west. Oh dear, it is tough. It is. There is some weird masochism in entrepreneurship, isn't there? Because it is tough. We all talk about it, but then there is that weird addictive side to it as well, right? And there is so much positivity. I want to bring more of that positivity here as well, because obviously the show is called Strategy and Tragedy, and it's not to be doom and gloom. It's really born from a place of the LinkedIn humble bragging, the sifted press coverage, the neon lights, we've doubled the team. It's just, there's so much of this glossy veneer that we see, especially on social media, that having been on the inside, the outside, on the sidelines, having held so many different positions within the realm of entrepreneurship, I know the realities, the behind the scenes of what it actually takes, and not just from a practical perspective in terms of finances and data and validation, but internally I think I'm more interested in that, right? Like as a person, where do you find the motivation? Where do you pick yourself? How do you pick yourself back up again when you need to? So I'll ask you that same question. Like during those darkest moments, where have you turned to, or who have you turned to help pick yourself back up again?
I think it's something that for me has changed a lot over the last, so my business will be 14 years old in September. And in my early 20s, I was super driven. I was very sort of raw energy, and the consequence of that was I burned myself out really badly, twice at least, probably a lot more than that, but I had 2 big bouts of burnout. One of them was after my investor drama, and then the other one was actually not long after I finally first shipped the product. My body just crashed and gave out. So I very much learned the hard way the consequence of not looking after myself and of running myself into the ground. Especially that second patch of burnout after I first shipped, I was so ill. The doctors thought I had MS. My body was just nope, enough. You've run us into the ground for years. We're not doing it anymore. And that kind of made me sort of reassess what I wanted. And I think especially as I've gotten older and now I'm in my 30s, and over the last few years, like I'm not really driven in the same way I was in my 20s. Like I feel like I hit sort of 30ish, and in a lot of ways I'd achieved my, dream life. And I remember being in Australia and I'd been flown out there to speak at an event, and I just thought, this is everything 25-year-old Joe dreamed of. And I thought, like, where next? And do I still want this? And in our world, we're meant to build these unicorns. We're meant to have this hockey stick growth curve. We're always meant to be trying to be like bigger and better and faster. And there is a time and a place for that, and yes, that's right for some businesses, but I always set out to build a business that was good for people and good for humanity. And I think I've just sort of mellowed out a bit over the last few years. And like, yes, I want my business to grow, and I want it to grow in a way where it's having the most impact, not necessarily like making the most money or going to have the biggest exit or gonna have the flashiest humble brag on LinkedIn about whatever I've done lately. So I think in terms of like looking after myself, it's kind of having the courage to choose what's right for me and what success looks like for me, and not what society and the startup world or my peers or LinkedIn says or makes me feel like success should be.
I love that so much, Jo. That definitely resonates on such a deep level, and I'm sure will with many of our listeners. I think it's really natural as well to go through those phases, so I totally get it. All right, sadly, 2 quick questions that I want to wrap this interview with, so I cannot let you leave here without asking you about being England's strongest woman. Tell me about that.
Yes. I mean, again, back to that rah-rah energy I talked about in my 20s.
Yeah.
As a person, I just don't really do anything by halves. So
it wasn't enough building this tech
well, it
company.
happened by accident. I did
Didn't mean to.
So I was basically just a bit overweight and a bit chubby, and I joined a gym, and I just got a bit carried away. And the gym I used to train at in Newcastle was run by a guy who used to be Britain's strongest man.
Wow.
And on a Saturday morning, all the strong men used to train there. And there's only so long you can hang around men who are like flipping tires and pulling trucks before you think, I wonder if I could flip that tire. So I sort of started to dabble in it, and then I entered a competition just for fun. And I came second in the competition. But what I didn't realise was the competition was a qualifier for England's strongest women. And so my coach said, well, you might as well go. You've qualified. And I thought, I can't go. So I went. And the first year, my goal was just to not come last. But I came 4th. And what that meant was I was the first person off the podium.
Oh,
so I had to stand next to the podium, and I was like, you know what, next year I'm having that. So I trained all year, and then I went back next year and won that.
And nabbed the top spot. Congratulations. How does the feeling of success or victory compare from the physical achievement versus business achievement?
So the thing that I really like about weightlifting, and I think the reason it's been played such a big role in my otherwise quite chaotic business journey, is the thing about strength training is if you put in the work, you get the results. So if you do X amount of reps at Y weight and you follow that progression, the outcome, you will always get the results that you work for. And that's not always true in business. You can work your ass off and not get the results you deserve in business. So I think I didn't really realize it at the time, but the times that I was performing my best in weightlifting were the times when my business was wildly out of control. And I think in hindsight, I was turning to that as maybe not a crutch, but I needed something in my life where when I put in the work, I got the results.
Jo, this resonates so much. I feel like I'm saying the same with everything that you're saying, that this resonates on such a deep level for me. I went through not exactly the same because I didn't win England's strongest women competition, But
Did you run a marathon? That's the other thing.
Yeah,
everyone does.
if you're not weightlifting like tires, you're running a marathon. I totally get it, because the last definitely 6 months of my previous business was really when I went in hard with my fitness era. And I didn't, exactly as you say, I didn't quite realize it consciously at the time. But obviously hindsight's a wonderful thing. I realized exactly what you just said. I was like, this is something where I've got a sense of control, and I know that I'm getting out what I'm putting in, and it's just not happening with my business.
Yeah, I can make this work for me, and I can achieve some level of success that other people can't mess up for me.
But the bigger thing with that as well, and this is coming from someone, obviously you're super smart, went into higher education, so I'm not sure if it was the same for you in your earlier years, but like I was very much like the school nerd, top of the class, like A star, you know, Hermione Granger. And that was also, you know, that was another like shock coming out into the real world, which is again like
being a little fish.
But just you get out what you put in again, where it's like, if I study, I work hard, I read these books, you know, it's very template structured. I do my homework, I show up to class, I pay attention, you know, it's like follow these rules. At school you're taught to follow rules. If you follow the rules well, you'll get rewarded exam time. You don't have that. So it's the same kind of thing with the fitness. Anyway, I've had a lot of time to think about it. All right, love that story. I feel like I'd love to like go out and flip some tires now and put the weight into the test. Exactly, right? Exactly. Final traditional closing question. Now you might want to take a beat to think about this one, but I always end the interviews with the same question, which, given the title of the show is Strategy and Tragedy, is what's one tragedy, so to speak, that's taught you an unforgettable lesson? Now, we talked about the investor drama. That was definitely a big one. But if there's anything else, either business, personal, that you want to just kind of end this interview with some pearls of wisdom on?
Those really bad periods of burnout and like putting my own health under so much strain and arguably it's so much risk for like a business I just don't think that's ever worth it. Like, and I think as founders we get really caught up in our own businesses and in being successful and in wanting those to work for various reasons, sometimes for customers, sometimes for ourselves, sometimes because I know for a long time I was driven by wanting to prove other people wrong and all the people that thought or told me that I couldn't do it. And just if I had, the doctors thought I had MS, and if I had driven myself to that point for like a business, like it would have been so stupid. And I think sometimes we forget that there'll always be other ideas, there'll always be other businesses. Like if this one doesn't work or it all comes correct, just let it go, because you're not getting another body. If you screw your health up too badly, like you're not getting that back. You don't get a do-over with your body, with your health, hopefully a bit with your mind, but even that, you can end up too far gone in a way that can really detract from the enjoyment of life. So
you can have another business, but you can't have another body. Yes. What are some top tips? How are you taking care of yourself these days? How are you managing to slow down, eat right, get enough sleep? Like, any wellness tips you want to share?
I'm pretty religious about exercise. Obviously that's sort of a non-negotiable for me, to the point where if I have a really busy week, I will just schedule time, even if it's the middle of the afternoon. I'm putting in 90 minutes and I'm going to the gym and I'm doing that. And if someone wants a meeting in that time, it's taken. The other thing that I'm quite diligent about now is just knowing myself. Like, I'm quite introverted and I find it super draining to just be on calls all the time. And often I think people feel like they should somehow be entitled to my time, or if you're working with them or doing whatever, that then if you have a clear day, they should be able to book themselves into it. But I'm quite religious now about enforcing boundaries around having ideally a day a week as a minimum, maybe a couple of half days where I just have some time to just focus on what I want to focus on, to work without being interrupted, and to just doing that deep work or that more strategic stuff on my business just helps me fill my cup in a way that sitting on calls or meetings all the time can take away from. So.
Yeah, same actually. Yeah, I totally get it. Definitely on the same page with so many things, Jo. We've come to the end of our time. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear some of your story, what highs and lows you've been through. You've definitely had your fair share of ups and downs. So I'm sure that's still only the tip of the iceberg.
Very much
that we've managed to squeeze in. But I feel like we've got kind of all the best little kind of nuggets. So thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you so much for listening. Really hope you've enjoyed this episode with Jo. What an inspiration. Make sure you tune in and hopefully see you next time.